Hello, welcome to another episode of the DSL podcast. I am your host, Dave Cole, and today's guest is Keturah Kotavirdi. She comes to us from PayPal, where she is the global head of analytics and data science for the global merchants, which we'll ask you a little bit what that entails. And prior to that, you spent about 5-6 years at eBay. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is true, Dave.
Great. Cool. So one thing that I think I just want to dive into to hear a little bit more about is just what is like at PayPal. Tell us a little bit about your role briefly with regards to global merchants. Like what is it that your team works on?
Sounds good. First of all, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure sitting down with you and talking about such an important topic. And then about the PayPal role, I would say I came to PayPal to lead the analytics and data science team for their small business side of the house, which you can imagine PayPal is a two-sided network. You have consumer and you have merchant. And your merchants, you have like wide variety of groups from like really big enterprise merchants to the mid-market to the merchants who are joining us through channel partners like Shopify and WooCommerce to all the unmanaged business. So my team was on the hook to actually help grow the business through data and insight. And by that, we mean like growing the net new acquisition, growing the cross-sell side of our business, and reducing the churn and decline. And almost about 2 years ago, I expanded my responsibility to take over the commercial side of our business. So pretty much we are working with all of our sales team, enterprise sales, inside sales, all of our customer success management, our demand gen team to really partner with us and help them grow our business through data and insight, but also most importantly, provide a better experience for our customers globally.
That's awesome. Thank you, Keturah. Let's start off with your experience at eBay and that sort of kicked off your career. I think in preparation for this podcast, you had sort of a fascinating story on how you sort of injected data science into one aspect of eBay's business. So take it away, Keturah.
Thank you. And I would say it's actually an emotional story for me as well. It was my first job in industry. And I said that I grew up in advertising and I grew up with eBay. And I had such a fascinating experience. I would say the piece made that experience very exciting and motivating for me was that, first of all, advertising was a smaller startup within the company. So you can imagine you had the funding and a sponsorship of the big organization, but you had a luxury of moving really fast, working cross-functionally to make things happen really quickly. And I was one of the founding members of their data science and analytics unit within the ads business. So we partner with all the product organization, engineering organization, the sales team, go-to-market team, and operations team to build up a data and analytics organization to help grow the advertising business through data and insight. So as part of that journey, we actually launched many new business lines, advertising business line for eBay. And also you can imagine eBay core business is commerce. So really figuring out how to scale the advertising business within a separate business unit that the main core business, it's commerce. It's very interesting. And there are a lot of great application of data science and analytics that you can leverage to grow the business with.
Right. So this is advertising within the eBay site itself. Is that correct? So this is not like advertising, like brand advertising outside of the, eBay's walls. So like commercial, television commercials and things like that. Is that correct?
Definitely. It was not on the marketing side. So I was not on the
right
side of the ecosystem, like buying ads for eBay brand, but we were actually having advertising platform, both for on eBay, helping sellers and brands grow their businesses on eBay. And also at some time, we had an off-network advertising as well, but not advertising on behalf of eBay, advertising on behalf of other merchants.
Right. So if you're a merchant selling your wares on eBay and you want to post an ad to a specific audience within the eBay platform, so
yes,
as the customer's on, and you think that your product is going to resonate with them, and it might be something that they're interested in, that's what you were helping to inject some analytics into. So how did you go about doing that? You said there's sort of an emotional story here. What is how did that come to be? First job out of college.
So I would say it's funny because actually I remember, I think it was around 2015, I was still managing some of the other advertising unit, and exactly the business line that you mentioned currently is known as sponsor ads or promoted listing on the platform, they decided that the kind of analytics and data science unit is moving to my organization. And I remember I had a couple of really interesting conversations with some of the go-to-market and sales leader as well. So I said, okay, our product is fairly new, and you can imagine it doesn't really matter if you work for a big company or a smaller company. At every point, you are making the call about prioritization because all your resources, engineering, product, all the functions are limited. So I asked them the question that, okay, actually, what type of sellers are we going after with the existing product to get out of this platform? But also, more importantly, what type of listings or items are we asking these guys to put on the platform? And, I had a great conversation. It was a hallway conversation. And I was actually thinking about it over the weekend. And I get back to our kind of GTM leader and said that I think we need to be more intentional around where we need to go after, because there is, with the current existing product we have, you can imagine that consumers are already doing a lot of searches on eBay. So you can imagine where you have a selection gap, and you can build a data science model to see who out there in the marketplace has the right listing. So pick up the targeted listing for the go-to-market plan and say, hey, guys, go after the list of these sellers. But also, importantly, imagine you are a seller and I reach out to you and say, hey, Dave, you are a great candidate for this product. You should hop on this because of X, Y, and Z. There is a great benefit. You can grow your GMV and yada, yada, yada. But the reality is that you will ask the question, hey, what type of listing I should put on the advertising unit? Probably from a margin standpoint, it doesn't make sense to upload all your listing on the advertising platform. So we went one step further and built the item recommendation, that build a model that recommending to each sellers that what type of items you should actually put on the advertising platform. And also the third part, I would say, complete kind of the demand side of the equation was the pricing recommendation. So pretty much seller recommendation, item recommendation, and pricing recommendation on how you can actually grow the business. Because I always say that it's a flywheel effect, that you get the right demand on the marketplace, the consumers will come and do the checkout around them, and it's more about the seller gets more revenue. You have more greater story to onboard more sellers. So that was a greater story that programmatically how data science and analytics help us to start building that business line cohesively.
So let me slow it down here for myself. So you have this new sort of merchant advertising platform that you're rolling out at eBay back in I think you said the 2015 sort of timeframe. And the first problem you thought about when I think you mentioned you were talking to some of the leaders who were rolling out this platform is, well, which sellers are we going to go after? Like, which sellers do we think this new ad platform might, which audience would be interested in this? And that can be all sellers. We can't invest, just go after, sort of spam everybody to let them know about this. We need to be more targeted, right? So I think the first place where you saw needed some sort of analytics was basically in sort of, maybe it was a segmentation or some sort of an analysis to figure out what sort of cohort or groups to go after. And I imagine what messaging to go after with them. And then the next thing was actually, it was item recommendation. So was that part of the ad platform as well? So if I'm if I'm a consumer and I'm buying a product, like here are some other products you might be interested in building that as sort of like a part of the ad platform, so to speak. Is that do I have that right?
Yeah, so think about it this way. It was that if you are a seller, you need to onboard your listing as part of our advertising platform. So imagine you have 10,000 listing on eBay or 1,000 listing. You need to decide, are you uploading all your listing or are you uploading selection of your listing? The whole point for any advertising unit is that the seller is willing to spend some money on advertising with the hope that they are getting the return and their GMV will increase. So that is why that we build the item recommendation, that these are the items that seller X that we believe that if you put on our advertising, it will help you grow the GMV through that.
Right. So similar to the pricing, there's the next sort of group, the sort of type of use case that you went after. Is you're basically, instead of just saying, hey, merchant, come to this new platform and figure it out, you were being more, you were using analytics to be more prescriptive, saying, first of all, let's target which merchants we want to go after. Number one. Number two, let's help them figure out what items they should be advertising, and then also number three, like how should they be pricing them, right? So in order to get the best sort of return on their sort of ad dollar, right? So do I have that right?
Exactly.
All right. Wow. So even a blind squirrel. No, that's really interesting. So you propose these sort of three different approaches of where analytics can be sort of integrated into this new sort of rollout of this new ad platform. What was the response? Like I imagine it was a good one. Imagine they said like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, Keturah. What was the response?
Definitely the response was very positive. I would say one thing throughout my career I learned is that it always takes a village, and cross-functional collaboration between the data science team, the engineering team, the product team, and the business unit is super critical for any successes on the business side. And it's not like the data science team can solve this in an isolation. So it was a close collaboration with the business unit and with the product organization. And we had a, very pragmatic approach of test and learn. Let's build this quickly and, test it for a couple of sellers and see what are the responses and see if we want to scale it further as well.
So, all right. So you took like sort of a test and learn approach. And that actually, I forgot at the outset to mention the agenda, but this actually segues nicely into the agenda. We wanted to talk about introducing, sort of injecting data science into the business. This example has been fantastic. The other thing I wanted to talk about is sort of experimentation in the corporate world, and just how do you educate the business side to be okay with doing this sort of test and learn approach. And the third thing I wanted to talk a little bit about with you is how you've built out in recent years your data science team, and what are some of the things that you look for, and what are some of your philosophies. At any rate, getting back to this fantastic and fascinating story. So you said, hey, you don't need to trust, take my word for it. Let's do some tests. So what did that look like?
So it was pretty much actually in this special case, it was not that they are taking any risk. So pretty much we came in, we built item recommendation and seller recommendation model. So we came up with the list of targeted sellers and asked them that these are the folks that you should have an outreach around them and get them on the platform. And if they show some interest, you should actually tell them that this is the item recommendation that you have for them, that these are the lists we recommend them to put it on the platform. So it's literally, there was a data scientist on my team. We brainstormed on the first version of the approach. We built it pretty quickly. I still remember that at the time we do not have an automated product to upload everything in the system. So we were working with a couple of our account managers to upload the items on the platform. But that was like, we started actually monitoring that very closely, that, okay, these were a couple of sellers came through our recommendation. These are the listing we recommended. Are we actually showing the ROI for them? Because at the end of the day, it's just the seller getting extra money on the table, and they have some expectation of incremental sales that they are getting. Eventually, we ended up actually scaling the program to more sellers and broadly in the organization.
So end of the story is, successful, ended up rolling it out. I mean, did some of the sort of places where you injected the sort of data science, it sounded like it was fairly manual in the early days, but did it become more automated, more integrated with the platform itself?
Exactly. And I would say you touch base on a great point. I would say there are like pretty much three areas that data science can help a lot. And one is probably through automation. In any organization, there are a lot of things that either it's a pain point for the consumer, or it's a pain point for the existing people within the company, that there are processes, tasks, activities that they are doing manually. And with these, all the advancement in data science, you can pretty much automate a lot of manual tasks. And the second, I always say that intelligence. You don't want your business unit or your product think about what to work on, who to sell, who to service, what to service at what price. You really want to work on the problems that the so what to the business is very clear. And if I go back to your question that, hey, how do you, convince them? Because the reality is that you cannot solve any problem overnight. And for me, it's just building that trusted partnership with your cross-functional stakeholders and showing them the path that here is the Uber vision where we want to go, but here is the short-term solution, here is the long-term solution, and here is the path to get there. And I always remind the people on my team that definitely solving the problem is really important, but the more important part is why we are solving that problem and what is the so what to the business. If you are clear on the why and the so what, usually you can get the buy-in fairly quickly within the organization.
Yeah, I think that if there's any, take from my perspective, Keturah, just having spoken with a number of DSLs in the DSL podcast, if there's any main takeaway to data scientists out there who are wanting to become DSLs, it's understand the business, like get as close to them as possible, set up those partnerships, become their ally, understand, the use cases, understand why it's important, understand how to measure your projects and show value, all that good stuff. Like the more you do that and the better you do that, the more effective you will be as a DSL. That is sort of loud and clear. So one thing that I wanted to segue into is that balance between doing sort of project, purposeful project-based work, right? And also doing some of the R&D sort of experimental type work. What are some of your advice out there, just based on your experience, on how to balance those two?
It's a great question. I would say it's also, in my view, depends on the maturity of the project and the business line as well, right? If you have a more project, probably you have a more kind of project-based approach, but you also want to make sure that you are not only focusing on the short-term stuff, and you want to have a balance of accelerating your business short-term, but also solving and establishing yourself for the long-term win. The way I run my organization is through that we have a quarterly roadmap. So pretty much for different areas within the organization, the leaders are in my group, they put like quarterly project that pretty much we try that 70% of our time, we decide that these are the projects that we want to work on, and we get pre-alignment with our cross-functional stakeholders to make sure that we are aligned, because at the end of the day, we want to help these guys grow the business. So if we are doing something and there is a need on the product side or on the business side, we want to make sure that we have that cross-functional alignment, or on the operational side. But there are 30% of the stuff that I would say all the businesses today, especially in technology, is moving really fast. So you cannot necessarily predict that what's happening on the business in the next 3 months. So in other words, you need to balance off the agility that you don't want, to slow down the business, but at the same time, you also be laser focused on the long-term win as well. So I try to do that. But also on the research and development, like really longer bet, there might be actually projects that we don't have it right now. So it's really about, for me, prototyping it in a smaller scale. I always say that, like, show some quick wins in a smaller scale. And I always tell the folks on my team that in data science team, you have a luxury of working on any projects you want, as long as you prove the value to the organization. Right. But don't go fully in and spend, months on like prove your point, like do something quick and dirty, prove the value, get other people's feedback and buy-in first, and then you can get a lot of momentum in the organization and go. Because the worst thing that can happen is you are working on a lot of cool projects, but nobody is using it, because at the end of the day, I always said that the data science team and analytics team exists to help grow the business and make all the other people's life easier in the organization.
Yeah. So a lot of good stuff there. So first of all, quarterly roadmap. So I imagine at the beginning of each quarter, you sort of sit down with your team to figure out what projects you're going to be tackling. I imagine also the business side is sort of aware of that roadmap. The second thing I heard you say is that, like, roughly speaking, 70% of your team's time is focused on some of the roadmap related items, and the other 30% is sort of more ad hoc, right? Because their business is moving fast, and you never know when you're just going to get something like, hey, I need this, tomorrow, or what have you. I need some analysis done or a model built, and also, like, but then where does so R&D, like what does R&D look like? Like, let's say you had I don't know if you have, do you have members of your team who are dedicated to just doing some type of research? Like, what does that look, what does a day in the life of that person look like?
I have a very small group that are doing an R&D that is not aligned to the project. It's like a small team of like 3 or 4 people. Mm-hmm. And about our big bets that we literally brainstorm, like nobody are working on those projects right now. We truly believe that we can accelerate the business through some, data science capability, and they will start working on it. I would say you can imagine not all the time our bets are correct. So it's kind of a balance that
Sure.
they're really good finding out of it, and we go and double click on it and build momentum around it. And sometimes, hey, we will pivot quickly, like fail fast and move on to something new. It's a very small team that we kind of have it dedicated completely to the R&D part.
That's awesome. So they're they're working on big bet, which means they're probably working on new ideas. Or are they also working on? Do they ever go back to other, maybe older models and say like, I think we can, outperform an older model? Did they also do, with maybe, I don't know, like a deep learning, like some other approach that maybe your team hasn't taken to date?
So I would say combination of both. Some of them
okay.
might be bets that the capability doesn't exist, but some of them, to your point, you always like take a step back and you try to, hey, you build something and it's good, but it's not great, and you can make it better, and how we can make it better so the team spends some time to actually improve it.
So here's the question for, if I'm a DSL listening to this podcast, I'm thinking to myself, like I might be thinking to myself, I don't have an R&D team, right? I might just have a team that's 100% focused on project-based work. Everything that we do has to get approved by the business, has to have a budget associated with it, yada, yada, yada. But to your point, like there can be some big bet, important strategic things that, strategic ideas that don't come from the business side, that come from the data science teams themselves, right? How did you convince the powers that be that you needed to carve out this small team to be able to do R&D? I mean, maybe it was an easy conversation, but for those out there that are thinking, you know what, I probably need to create this function. I think this, making these big bets could really pay off for me in the long run. How did you do that?
Good question. And I would say it's definitely not an easy answer. And I always say that even for these like 2 or 3 people I have like on an R&D, I try for them to have a hybrid role that have a project that is like adding a direct impact to the business, but also giving them some a space for exploratory stuff, right? Example was that actually one of the outcome of one of our R&D projects, like it is just fascinating. Like we build an algo that it's pretty much reprioritizing and scoring the leads that are going to all our inside sales ecosystem, so it can unlock revenue directly for our organization. So I had like a kind of a MVP of that project, and then presented to our EVP and said that there are some revenue out there that we are leaving on the table. Can we actually put more resources behind it? And it was much an easier conversation because I had a result of the back test. I could have shown what is the impact to the business. So easily I could have that conversation. But I would honestly agree. There is no easy answer. And for me, it's just you need to be very creative of, definitely you don't want to have a team that you feel like, hey, they're working on cool stuff, but not having an impact to the business. But at the same time, if you're just focusing on today and tomorrow, you probably will lose out on a big picture down the road.
Yeah, I think selling that, the fact that you need to have that balance, right? And I think a 70-30 split sounds pretty good to me. I think that's number one. And the second thing I heard you say is that, building out a prototype and being able to, instead of just walking and saying like, hey, we're thinking about like kicking off this sort of shoot the moon big project. It may flop or it may succeed. You actually go in with a small prototype. Like when you're talking about an EVP, you need to come prepared, right? If you're talking to somebody, at a lower level, you might be able to say like, hey, we're thinking about, building out this prototype. But I think starting with a prototype is fantastic advice. I'm gonna segue, since we're talking about the folks that have a hybrid role and your team. I want to talk a little bit about hiring. I mean, in a podcast that I've had in the past, I mentioned that it looks today like there's sort of 3 times the demand for data scientists as of 2020. Then there are sort of the supply of data scientists, experienced data scientists that can meet that demand. So what have you done from a hiring perspective to sort of meet your own personal demand for building out your team?
First of all, I would say I always hire for diversity and complementary of a skill set. And by diversity, I don't only mean the diversity of gender or background. I truly mean the diversity of thought process and a skill set. You can imagine the data science and analytics is the widest spectrum of a skill set. and you potentially need a hybrid of this skill set to be successful. Second is that for me, I always say that skills are cheap, passion is priceless. It is, especially like these days, it's super easy to pick up some of the technical skill set that you need to be a good data scientist. But the most important part is actually the thought leadership, somebody that is a good problem solver, that can take a step back, break down the problem into sub-problem and synthesize the recommendation. And again, elaborate on the so what. And also stakeholder leadership. I think we touched base during our conversation many times that you cannot drive value in an isolation. And it is more and more important that the data science and analytics team work cross-functionally within the business unit, product unit, engineering, and all the different functions. So I always try to solve for that. So I would say historically, I hire both, I would say, fresh out of grad school people because I moved from academia to in industry. And I found also that topic very fascinating, that how you can kind of educate people and help them to go through that transition of in the academia to industry, but also hiring more skill set, more skilled leaders to bring to my organization. Especially, hiring leaders in my organization, I always hire for complementary of the skill sets because I don't want to be the limit for the organization. I always say that any of the leaders in my organization, there is at least one or two area that they are 10x better than me, that we usually celebrate it, because I want all of us collaboratively be the, superstar and world-class organization. And for me, really actually be intentional that at every stage of the organization, what type of skill sets you need, it is very important. I would say second part is that majority of the time, the organizations are putting a lot of effort and energy into the technical training side of the house, like having seminars, classes, all of these on like a statistic, machine learning, and, programming for people, versus in my view, there have been limited attention on how we can teach people to be a better storyteller, like how to structure your thoughts. What is the end-to-end data science and analytics project cycle look like? How can you actually have a more, a structured way of starting the project, getting engaged with your stakeholder and getting it finished and releasing? We also spend a lot of time and energy in my organization to just train people across that and make sure that it's both a combination of technical skills and soft skills.
Okay, there's like a dozen phenomenal sort of tips and tricks that you just gave us there. I think, and I was taking notes. So I like to recap to the audience. Diversity of skills is important, but that being said, skills are cheap and passion is priceless. I think that's a great sort of teaching tool. I think all of us want to work with people who love what they do, who are passionate about what they do. And, generally speaking, they're going to be the people who drive the most value for your team, and they're most fun to work with, quite frankly. And then, like, you've mentioned this a few times, but what's the so what, right? And I think having that in the back of your mind, when you're presenting, don't forget that. Right. Like exactly. I think, one of the big mistakes that I think a lot of data scientists make is they sometimes their passion can come through and they love to talk about, how they built the cake. Right. And, what all the ingredients that went into the cake, and the audience is they might be sitting there going, you find this interesting storyteller here or data scientist, but I'm waiting for the so what. Like, why do I care about the ingredients? Does the cake taste good? Can I sell the cake? Can I, that kind of thing. Taking the weird cake analogy too far there, I think. But at any rate, you also hired fresh out of grad school, right? I imagine people were, coming out of grad school, they're ready to hit the ground running. They're very passionate, like you were when you started your career at eBay and now PayPal. What else do I have here? The data, the storytelling. I said data storytelling, but this is also the findings from building your models is really important. And there, you said there's a bit more of an emphasis on the technical training sometimes, and there is that storytelling aspect. I could not agree more. What have you done from a storytelling standpoint to round out, maybe when you hire somebody that have phenomenal technical expertise, how have you cross-trained them? Like, have you built your own training course? Like, what have you done?
We actually have an internal training course for my organization that it's an hour, and it's kind of very simple, but it's like 2 examples, like how for different groups of audience, how you put your story together, some of the mistakes that people can make, some of the mistakes you should avoid, and some of the advices and best practices. And we also ask people to kind of mentor each other. Like you can imagine the people who've been with the organization, they
Sure.
might, over time they learn their way through like how they upscale their storytelling. And we try, especially if we have new people on the team, like, okay, like tag team with someone else in the organization so we can review the, agenda and the story and see what is going on. But obviously, unfortunately, there is not many like good resources out there internet for people. But
come up with there's a business idea there for you and me. It's secret safe with us for us to build a course on that. I think it certainly is needed. But I think one simple technique like you just mentioned is just presenting to your teammates right before you're presenting to the larger audience. I know that's a technique I've used time and again. I've even in my past, like I will poll members of the audience just one-on-one, right? If you have that, you talk about partnerships and relationships with the business side, like take a couple of them, pull them aside and say like, hey, here's what I plan on presenting. Do you think this, hits the mark? Am I going to, wow people, or are they going to, am I going to, land the project or what have you? That can also be very helpful. I mean, the best case scenario is when you walk into those meetings and you get a lot of head nods, right? You get a lot of like perfect, exact, and then people adding on and saying, well, what if we also did this too? And you can do that if you've sort of, read a few folks in, like there's, so I think all of that is fantastic advice.
But I would say the two tactical advice that I usually give junior people that wants to improve a storytelling are first, I always say that consultants are very good with the storytelling. And there are online material like McKinsey has a McKinsey Quarterly or McKinsey Inside website. Bain has a lot of, great material on site. And I ask them that, hey, just be disciplined that every night, just review 10 slides online from any of these consultant course, but with critical thinking that how they are telling the story, how they are visualizing the finding, what are the key learning for you that you can eventually, leverage in the future. And that will become your whole kind of best practices of what are the levers you have to tell the story. So that is one. And the second one, I always ask people, some of my junior people, that go back to some of the presentations that you prepared 6 months ago and just, the project is over, you're no longer, working on it. Just bring it up, but this time be critical about what you could have done better and edit your presentation over and over. And we found actually when these two tactical feedback help people actually build that muscle of, it become easier for them to tell a story and build a story around their project.
100%. That, by the way, I found is very hard to do. Me personally, I'm always trying to improve the podcast and listening to episodes and trying to improve. It's hard. It's hard, like either listening to yourself or looking at something that you presented and just being like, man, I wasn't even close, or that was why did I say that, or why did I do that? It's hard to do, but it is how you improve, right? It's how you get better.
Totally.
Well, this has been great, Keturah. If folks are interested in getting in touch with you, other than LinkedIn, is to ask you questions or find out more. Is there any other way of getting hold of you? Is LinkedIn the best sort of way to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is the best way, and my email address is also listed on my LinkedIn. So I'm happy if people reach out through email as well. Happy to get in touch.
Well, fantastic. There's so much I learned today. I really appreciate you sharing your tips, tricks, and advice. Wish you nothing but the best, and thanks for coming on the DSL podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. I also learned a lot from you. So looking forward to staying in touch.
All right. Take care, Keturah.
Take care.